Today, we bring you a case from Mexico, the story of Dylan Randal Rencado Gonzalez. Join me as we explore all the details. In the municipality of Huachinango, in the state of Puebla, Mexico, a boy named Dylan Randal Mercado Gonzalez was born on July 20, 1996, to Liliana Lucero Mercado Gonzalez and Andres Amador Garrido. Although Andres never acknowledged him, Liliana, only 20 years old, bravely embraced life as a single mother, fighting for the well-being of her son. It wasn't long before Liliana met Francisco Javiera Lopez, a man from Puebla whom she married. Together, they had 3 more children. Francisco, who called himself a photographer, philosopher, and theologian, shared extreme convictions about the world with Liliana, particularly their belief in an agnostic doctrine that teaches every human being carries a divine spark. However, Francisco's character was marked by violence and possessiveness. He restricted Liliana from going out alone, which turned their home into a place rife with arguments and aggression. Dylan witnessed the mistreatment of his mother and eventually became the target of Francisco's anger. Liliana and Francisco's relationship had already seen 2 children. The first was born healthy, but the second was a tragedy, as the twins they were expecting were stillborn under difficult circumstances. This tragic event is believed to have fueled a deep-seated grudge in Francisco against Dylan, whom he blamed for the loss of the twins. From that moment on, Dylan's life became a living nightmare. Not only did he endure physical abuse from Francisco, but the man also manipulated Liliana into believing that she should only love the children she had with him. Instead of protecting her own son, Liliana, under Francisco's influence, began to mistreat Dylan as well. Dylan's grandmother, Araceli Gonzalez Becerra, soon became aware of the abuse and, alarmed, approached the authorities multiple times to seek custody of her grandson. However, her efforts proved futile. Araceli had made numerous complaints to the National System for the Integral Development of the Family, SNDIF, in the municipality of Jaupa, citing the constant violence inflicted on Dylan by his caregivers. As a result, the couple was forced to move to Nochislan, Zacatecas, where they stayed for a few months. Unfortunately, the violence continued and they eventually relocated to Teocaltiche, Jalisco, where Dylan's suffering not only persisted but escalated. The mistreatment was so extreme that at times Dylan was stripped of his clothes, bathed with running water in the street at night, and forced to kneel on stones as punishment. His screams echoed through the neighborhood daily, and though the neighbors heard his cries, no one intervened. Tragically, this indifference culminated in a fatal outcome for the young boy on November 11th, 1999. That night, Francisco and Liliana had a violent argument at home, which escalated into an assault by Francisco on Liliana, who was pregnant again and only days away from giving birth. It was then that little Dylan, just 4 years old, attempted to defend his mother. This act of love from Dylan, trying to defend his mother, only earned him a brutal beating from his stepfather. Instead of reciprocating her son's love, Liliana became complicit in the crime, joining Francisco in the tragic end of her son's life. When they realized that Dylan had stopped breathing, the couple devised a plan to dispose of his body. Francisco, who often traveled to Aguascalientes to develop photographs, chose this location as the place to hide the body, hoping it would throw the authorities off the trail. The child's lifeless body was placed in a cardboard box, along with a bloodied knife and garbage bags. Francisco then took the box and traveled about 80 kilometers to Aguascalientes. At the central bus station, he hailed a taxi that drove him to a neighborhood near the station. Around 7 a.m. on November 12th, Francisco discarded Dylan's body in a dumpster. The boy, only wearing a small T-shirt with a drawing of the cartoon 101 Dalmatians, was left there. After leaving the body, Francisco returned home to Jalisco, where Liliana was waiting. Together, they packed up their belongings and fled to Leon, Guanajuato. On the same night in Aguascalientes, a garbage collector approached one of the dumpsters. When he lifted the lid and felt the weight of a large closed cardboard box, his curiosity led him to open it. To his horror, he found a body wrapped in a Christmas-themed tablecloth and a floral quilt. Terrified, the man alerted the authorities, and investigations began to determine the identity of the child. During the forensic analysis, it was discovered that the child had marks on his wrists, indicating he had been tied up before his death. The child's body showed clear signs of prolonged abuse, including broken bones that had healed improperly, old bruises and burns on various parts of his body. This evidence pointed to the fact that Dylan had suffered abuse for some time. The cause of death was determined to be severe head trauma, including encephalic trauma, compounded by a ruptured bladder caused by the brutal blows. The discovery of the body generated significant media coverage, and the unidentified child became known as the child in the dumpster. As the search for his family became a priority for the police, the news spread quickly, prompting some witnesses to come forward with information about the events of that day. One woman, who worked as a street cleaner, recalled seeing a man get out of a taxi with a box in his hand, behaving suspiciously. Although she didn't pay much attention to him at first, she later lost sight of him. Thanks to this testimony, the authorities were able to locate the taxi driver, Jesus Muñoz Macias, who confirmed he had indeed driven a man to that street. This led investigators to draw up a sketch of the suspect, describing him as a tall, thin man of around 35 years old. A wanted bulletin was issued featuring both the suspect's sketch and a depiction of the boy's face, requesting that anyone who recognized him get in touch. The image was widely disseminated, leading to multiple hypotheses and potential leads, including the possibility that the child was the son of a woman working in Querétaro and that he had been abducted in Veracruz. Investigators moved to this area in hopes of obtaining a blood sample that could shed light on the situation. However, DNA tests performed turned out to be negative as time passed. The news of the child in the dumpster eventually reached Vil Guerrero, a town located on the border of Jalisco, Zacatecas, and Colima. A family from this town went to the Attorney General's office after hearing reports about a missing child who had been with his mother and was never seen again. Their search led them to locate the child's father in the United States, who was able to identify his son's shirt, and the United States, who was able to identify his son's shirt. However, when genetic tests were performed, the results were negative. Another person who believed she might know the child was a woman from Mexico City who also had a missing child. Blood samples were taken from both her and her husband, but the test showed no match. At that point, none of the leads had resolved the case, and an exhaustive investigation that lasted for years was unable to uncover the child's identity. The fact that the identity remained unknown provoked a wave of emotions, sadness, anger, and a deep desire to protect the little boy who met such a tragic end. The community rallied, calling for the child to receive a dignified burial. On January 6, 2000, his body was entrusted to a woman named Margarita Alonso de Barranco, who oversaw the burial. The little boy was laid to rest without anyone knowing his identity, and no answers were found as to who had committed such a horrific act against him. Clues remained scarce, and each lead seemed to lead investigators to a dead end. So the case remained unresolved for years, with all results being inconclusive. It wasn't until 2001 that the child's story generated media coverage once again, when the television program Mujer Casos de la Vida Real, hosted by the late actress Silvia Pinal, featured the case in one of its episodes. This program may be remembered by many as it was not only seen in Mexico but also throughout Latin America. After the episode aired, the portrait of the little boy was displayed and the public was asked for help in identifying him. Authorities requested that any information related to the case could assist them in bringing justice for an innocent child whose identity had yet to be determined. They emphasized that any information would be of great help. Thanks to this appeal, a man named Dionisio Perez de Moily went to the police after seeing the portrait of the child. The agents thought he might be the boy's father, but it turned out that Dionisio was the leader of a philosophical group in Aguascalientes, where Francisco had worked as a teacher. Dionisio claimed not only to know the boy, whom he identified as Dylan, but also provided the names of Liliana and Francisco. With this new information, the police began searching for the family. Although they could not find the couple, they did locate the boy's maternal grandmother, who identified the quilt in which the child had been found, confirming that it had belonged to her family for more than 2 decades. Multiple studies were conducted comparing the quilt's characteristics with those of the child found in the container. These analyses included image overlays, anthropological studies, and anthropometric measurements. The results revealed significant coincidences, such as a scar on the forehead, as well as facial measurements, especially in the nasal region and ocular orbits, all of which strongly suggested the child's identity. Facial simulations were performed using an X-ray of the child's entire skull. Forensic experts not only conducted visual studies, but also compared the fabric of the quilts that wrapped the child in the container with the one Dylan's grandmother had, confirming they were remarkably similar both in material and age. In addition, a specific mitochondrial DNA analysis focusing on the maternal line produced matches that corroborated the child's identity, confirming he was indeed Dylan. Although painful, this brought the family and the community certainty about the child's fate, and now the investigators' task was to find those responsible. The grandmother openly spoke about the violence Dylan had suffered and revealed to authorities that she had repeatedly attempted to gain custody of him. Detectives cross-referenced her statements with records from the DIF, National System for Integral Family Development, where complaints she had filed against Dylan's parents were found. Neighbors of the couple were willing to share information. Many confirmed that they knew the couple and that Dylan had been the victim of severe abuse. The testimonies described extreme punishments and deplorable conditions the child endured. Dylan's case took a darker turn when it was discovered that he was not the only child who had died near Francisco. It was revealed that Francisco had been previously married to a woman named Anabel de la Cruz Hernandez, and they had 2 children. And inside the Francisco house, Dylan, one of their sons, had died under suspicious circumstances at the age of 2 while in Francisco's care, which, according to the prosecutor's office, had led to their separation. Although Francisco claimed that the death of his 2-year-old son was an accident, the family blamed him and the case remained unsolved. The lack of evidence meant that the situation was not further investigated. At the time, those who knew Francisco described him as possessive and reserved, with a domineering personality. He had vision problems in one of his eyes and was known for his formal attire, often wearing dress pants and long-sleeve shirts. His financial instability was evident as he had significant debts in places where he had lived, and he often took out loans that he failed to repay. As the investigation progressed and more details about Francisco's life came to light, the community's anguish to find justice grew stronger. The pursuit of Francisco and his partner Liliana led investigators to several cities and towns in Jalisco, Zacatecas, Michoacán, Colima, and other states. Over 250 people were interviewed in an effort to locate the couple, with authorities also appealing to the public for assistance. The collaboration between various institutions and different localities proved vital in their search. Multiple visits were made, and the last ones were to Guadalajara, where the couple had reportedly been seen and had even filed a complaint with the DIF, claiming to have lost one of their children and seeking to adopt another. Their story of pain and loss garnered sympathy from some, which made the authorities' task even more complicated. The work of the authorities was challenging, and after years of investigation, Mexican authorities issued an arrest warrant on July 22, 2002 for Liliana and Francisco, who were believed to have crossed into the United States illegally, possibly assuming false identities to evade capture. They were being intensely sought on both sides of the border, and eventually their faces appeared among the FBI's most wanted. So, they were being done intensely sought on both sides of the border, and eventually their faces appeared among the FBI's most wanted. Despite numerous false leads, the search proved to be incredibly complicated and prolonged for years. Finally, after 26 years of searching, the case came to a close in January 2025. The prosecutor's office of Quintana Roo in the Yucatan Peninsula confirmed the capture of 49-year-old Liliana and 55-year-old Francisco. A detailed statement from the institution revealed that the case's investigations had established a solid foundation, enabling authorities to track the whereabouts of the fugitives who had been on the run for more than 2 decades. The arrest occurred specifically on the night of January 4th, 2025, in Chetumal, the capital of Quintana Roo, where the couple had been hiding since 2002. In this town, they had kept a low profile. Francisco worked as a party photographer, and Liliana sold flowers on the street. Some reports suggested that Liliana, along with the other children she had with Francisco, roamed the streets, constantly pretending to be pregnant as a tactic to generate empathy and encourage people to buy her flowers. Although some residents of the area recognized them, they were never linked to the crime until a crucial testimony led to their capture. After an intense security operation, the couple was transferred to Aguascalientes, where they were charged with intentional homicide, with the aggravating factors of advantage and brutality. Following their arrest, a young woman identifying herself as Liliana's daughter shared a message on social media defending her mother against the accusations that had painted her as an unnatural parent. In her post, she stated that Liliana had been a victim of Francisco's abuse and blackmail, and the image of her mother portrayed in the media did not reflect reality. The young woman revealed that Liliana had been in therapy for almost 8 years to process the trauma of what had occurred in 1999, just 15 days before her own birth. She explained that Liliana had confided in several people, including her brother, who had contacted the administrator of a support group and taken a picture of her mother to assure others that she was fine. The young woman also mentioned that both she and her siblings had begun receiving counseling to help them denounce the abuse their father had inflicted on them over the years. In her message, the young woman also asked for respect for the difficult situation her family was enduring, highlighting the delicacy of the entire ordeal during the ongoing investigation in early January 2025. At that time, Liliana and Francisco remained in a prison in Aguascalientes, awaiting a trial where they faced a potential sentence of up to 40 years in prison. However, many residents of the country consider this sentence insufficient given the immense harm done to an innocent child. Dylan's case is a heartbreaking tragedy that underscores the vulnerability of children subjected to abuse and neglect, serving as a disturbing reminder of how family dynamics can become breeding grounds for violence, often hiding immense suffering behind closed doors. Dylan's fate should drive us to work together as a community, demanding greater accountability and action from institutions while remaining vigilant in protecting the most vulnerable. The injustice done to this child hurt not only his extended family, but also an entire society. Our collective responsibility is to ensure that such a tragedy is never repeated. This is the end of today's case, one that deeply shocked many and was discussed extensively on TV when it occurred. Now, after all these years, we are following up with an update. We will continue bringing you more developments on this case that touch so many hearts as we remember the terrible injustices done to this child. It's terrible what they did to this child. We hope these individuals receive the sentence they truly deserve. If you found this video informative, please don't forget to leave a like. Also, remember to subscribe if you haven't already. I update my content 3 or 4 times a week, and if you're subscribed, you'll get a notification every time I upload a new video. You can also follow me on my other social media accounts where I post content almost every day. Now, I'll see you in the next case.